All right. Well, first off, thank you for joining me on our look at the first episode of Amazon's Wheel of Time series.
You're so welcome. You're giving me a chance to talk about a series I've given entirely too much time to for how many criticisms I have of it. I love it and hate it.
Understandable. I didn't start reading it until I watched the first episode and figured I'd compare the two, so it's going to be interesting to see how our observations differ here.
Yeah, I haven't finished the book series yet. I think I'm 8 or 9 books in and still making slow progress. Uh, I guess. Look, I'm probably going to spoil things. I'm really not good about that sort of thing, especially when we're talking about the long-term implications of changes that they've already made.
Yeah, which is why I wanted to bring you on with this because, obviously I could look at the episode and say, yeah, this worked, this didn't, but I have no context for the greater series, so.
And then I get to sit here and just weep for Tom Maryland.
We'll get to that in a minute. So let's, I guess, just get the stuff out of the way that doesn't really apply to the book. So, first off, I love the costume design.
Oh yeah, that so far has been spot on.
Yeah,
Uh,
they did a phenomenal job nailing the backwater village peasant look, but still making it visually interesting.
I, with one exception, and even that is again, a lot of these I'm going to willingly volunteer as nitpicks. All of the costume design has been great. There's one costume that I don't like, but not because it's poorly designed.
Which one's that?
That would be my boy, my child. I'm Lamb.
Oh, yeah.
Look, he's supposed to have armor. If I remember correctly, when he enters the village for the first time, he's in his armor and he's wearing his warder's cloak. He doesn't care. He doesn't care what anyone thinks of him or if they figure out he's a warder. He's just there to kill something if it tries to touch Moraine.
I do remember reading that. So the second thing that doesn't really apply to the book at all, but I loved the music in that first episode.
Oh, the music was phenomenal.
Yeah, very much reminded me of The Witcher 3.
Which I'm going to immediately simp for any soundtrack that sounds like The Witcher 3. I can't help it. I love that kind of Eastern European folk music sound.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I actually heard the soundtrack before I played the game. Because for that brief stint of grad school I did, that was what I listened to while I was writing my papers.
I heard the soundtrack while I was playing the game, but that's also what I wrote to for most of my papers in college and most of my NaNoWriMos, however you pronounce that, since then.
Yep. So, hearing those strings and the drums and the voice, the same vocal style, I was just like, yes, somebody was also a big fan.
It makes me so happy. So, yeah. Loved that.
Yeah. Which I think about covers it.
Yeah, those are costume design and music is all stuff that the book doesn't have.
Nope. Which brings us to the prologue, which is probably the weakest part of the first episode, in my opinion. It's very clumsy.
I understand why they wouldn't do the prologue from the book, because it's very weird and makes zero sense to anyone who isn't at least a few books into the series.
Yes, honestly, if it hadn't been for the fact that I've watched Brandon Sanderson's 2020 creative writing class lectures, where he digs into why that prologue is important, I would have had no clue what was going on when I read the book. So I do understand not starting the show with Dragonmount. Even if what they replaced it with still wasn't very good, in my opinion.
I tend to agree. I was a little put off at first. The poor people I watched the first episode with, I felt really bad because it was a lot of me going, huh, that's different, or wow, I like how they're doing this, but that's not how it was in the book. They had to put up with a lot of that, particularly at the start, because not starting with Dragonmount, again, understandable choice. From a story perspective, how are they going to go back and explain all of that? Because that little prologue is so unbelievably important.
My guess, not having seen anything past the first episode yet, is they're going to do a flashback scene when the audience has enough context to understand why that is important.
I agree with you, and that concerns me. Because the events that happened there are known to very few, if any, people still alive. Like, I don't know if you've been introduced to this concept yet. I think they were mentioned. One of the Forsaken has an idea of what, like, how... Where most of the Forsaken and the Dark One themselves has an idea of how Dragonmount formed. But the whole... The specifics of Lews Therin's betrayal of mankind is something that, as far as I'm aware, Rand himself does not know yet. So how are they going to flashback to it?
That's an excellent question, and I'm very interested to see how they tackle that.
Me too, because, dear lord.
One thing that really caught my attention in that opening scene, though, after Moiraine has decided that, this helpless, unnamed person who is being murdered by Aes Sedai can't possibly be the Dragon Reborn, is the shot, like the sweeping shot over the landscape. And I don't know if this is intentional or just a coincidence. As it's panning over to get a better view of the mountains and the valley beyond, a lot of those mountains look like they could be buildings that have just gotten overgrown. And given the apparent very cyclical nature of history in this world, I thought that might actually have been a clever, intentional choice to kind of foreshadow that very early to the audience. I have no idea if that's correct. It was just something that caught my attention in that opening scene.
I think you're absolutely right, because, oh boy, yes. I don't even have anything to add there other than just my agreement, because, yep, that's probably right, because, cyclical about describes it.
Alright, so after that we get to the village. And there was one thing, like...
Good old Emond's Field.
Yeah, super weird to start with. Is there... Because obviously the hair braid in both versions of the story are important, but I don't remember the book mentioning anything about some test of courage type thing that the women have to do to earn their braid.
You see, that's because that doesn't exist. That's a change they just added to have a sort of dramatic opening. Though I do fully support Nineveh pushing Egwene off of a waterfall. The fact that she survived is unfortunate.
Not a fan, I take it.
This is something we're undoubtedly going to touch on a few times over the course of this. Several of the changes they've made so far are definitely there, at least in part, to downplay the inherent and rampant sexism of the original work. The gender politics of the Wheel of Time is hysterically bad.
Yeah, I definitely... Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, every grown man is a moron who, if left unattended, is going to just, hurt himself or other people. And of course, it's the women's job to look over them and make sure that they're okay. At least that's how the women see it. And all of the men view every single woman as fickle and unreadable, and you just gotta yes dear them and then go do your own thing, because clearly you know best, and they overthink everything and think with their emotions.
Yeah, I definitely got hints of that with the village council in the first few chapters.
It's so bad.
Yeah, especially that one guy who's I can't remember his name right now, but he's the one who's always like just naysaying everything everybody around him says, and I wanted to push him off a waterfall by the end of the 6th chapter.
Yeah, there's a few people. Like the village people of Emmonsfield, by and large, aren't bad people. But it does feel very 1950s.
I like that. Uh, Now, then we get to the Quarry Road scene, which I actually thought that the show did this scene in particular better than the book. Simply, they took advantage of the fact that they were a visual medium, and they didn't have to have pages and pages of description to set the mood for the scene. So they very quickly managed to establish kind of the relationship between Rand and his father. You get a good feel for both
All
characters.
My homies love Tam.
Everybody loves Tam. Yeah, you get a great feel for both characters, kind of how they approach the world, how they view each other, and just that little, like, the thing about the story with the berries.
Yeah.
It's just a really nice touch that's kind of missing from that scene in the book. Again, because Robert Jordan had to spend so much extra time setting just the utterly bleak tone of this scene. And even the first several chapters, because they're constantly going on about how they're having food problems or are about to have food problems, so...
I hope you really enjoyed that, because part of... I think I'm on book 8. A fair part of the story of book 8 is them trying to solve that.
Yeah.
It is still a problem 8 books in.
That's...
And admittedly, it's a big problem that's very hard to solve, because, spoiler alert, the bad weather and bad crops is a direct result of the Dark One's touch on the world.
I figured as much. I mean, the characters even know as much, though they're not willing to say it.
Yeah, because the thought that the Dark One is actually close to being freed and influencing the world more and more directly is terrifying, and at least in the book... Something that they definitely do better in the book, given that they have so much more space to talk about it and describe it, is the fact that the idea of the Dark One and the Forsaken and Aes Sedai and Warders are all somewhere between actual myth and fairy tale and borderline myth and fairy tale. There's people who just don't believe that Aes Sedai and Warders exist in Emmonsfield in the book.
I do remember that, yes.
Whereas in the in the show, they are moving at a much faster pace, so they just kind of glaze over that fact, which is a small change, but one I was a little sad about, because something the Wheel of Time does very well is the sense of scale, the sense of history that you get from it, and that, like, the myth and the folklore of the world is one of the things that really contributes to that. So I'm hoping they get back to that a little bit in the show.
Yeah, and I know one change that we're going to see later definitely definitely reduces that feeling in the show. However, before then, we have to get through Rand's introduction to, or at least the audience's introduction to Rand's friends, which is handled wildly differently.
Yes, in the fact that none of them have gotten hardly any screen time in the one episode of the show, so we don't really know who these people are. We know that good old Matrim doesn't have a great relationship with his parents.
I mean,
loves
his parents are... yeah,
the worst.
Yeah, his mom's an alcoholic. His dad's heavily implied to be a serial cheater.
Yup.
And neither of those characters were in the book that I have seen.
Nope. I believe Matt's parents are, at least his mother is mentioned, but I don't remember them getting a whole lot of time.
Yeah, his mother's. I think you see her at one point, and his father is mentioned only in passing because everybody refers to it as his house.
Yeah, I don't believe he's still in the picture, or he is and he's a lazy layabout drunk. I think it's the second one. It's been a while. Spoiler alert for something that happens later. Okay, that was fair warning. If anyone's still listening, it's their own fault. And also sorry to you, Graham. But the fact that they're giving a little bit of character development to Matt's parents and little sisters and his relationship to them is interesting because they don't last long.
So it's funny that you'll say that because of how the episode ends, and obviously it's a little early to get into that, but
Yeah.
it's interesting to me that you say that. But yeah, Matt's character is also very different. In the book, he's basically just your average teenager.
Yeah.
And then in this one, he's got a serious gambling problem to the point where he is stealing from people that he's known his entire life to get more money to gamble with. Which is an interesting character decision.
It's not out of character, but it is not in his character this early in the story.
Okay, that makes sense. So
Matt
they're probably
and gambling go hand in hand, but Matt and being bad at gambling is an odd choice.
So what I'm hearing is he's the party rogue.
Yes. 100%. He is the party rogue. With a little asterisk after that, his character arc so far in the books is one of my favorites. I don't know where it's going. And I don't think he does either. He's just along for the ride and hoping he isn't traumatized too many times. Spoiler alert, he is.
And then, of course, there's Perrin, who, in the book, as far as I've read, doesn't have a character yet. He is just the blacksmith's assistant.
He has a very difficult personality to show. He's supposed to be slow and deliberate and purposeful, which they always describe him as being. He's not stupid. He's very intelligent. He just chooses his words carefully, so people don't always assume he's very smart, and that's very difficult to show in the brief screen time he had. Him and his entirely fictitious wife.
Yeah, that's the...
Huh?
That's the, one of the biggest changes, and I think overall that's one of the changes people have really been struggling with. Because I've seen so many articles talking about Perrin's wife.
Yes, you mean the potentially interesting female character they introduced and then killed in the same episode purely for the advancement of a male character's story arc?
Yeah.
Woo! That's a trope everybody loves. Yeah, was not happy with that one. Also, the blacksmith and the blacksmith's wife, the people who've raised and trained Perrin, are great. I enjoy them in the books. They're so much fun. So I was sad.
Yeah, that's one of the changes that really still has me scratching my head, and I don't know if they're going to pay it off later.
Yeah. Well, again, spoiler alert. I'm going to avoid a lot of the really cool stuff about Perrin's story thus far in the books. Part of what they're doing, I believe, hopefully isn't giving them too much credit, is Perrin spends a lot of time with an aversion to weapons and violence. He will enact violence if strictly necessary, but it makes him feel extremely guilty, and that's a burden he carries for a very long time. There's an anecdote in the books that I think comes up later, or it has come up already, I don't remember, where when Perrin started getting his feet under him as a blacksmith, he made himself a battle axe and was chewed out by his master for it, because I believe it was something along the lines of his hands are in the hands of a craftsman, someone who's there to serve the people. His hands are not the hands to make weapons to hurt people. In the books, Perrin, at least for a little bit, I believe, fights with his blacksmith's hammer because he is so uncomfortable with the idea of using a weapon. So I think what they did with Layla, his fictitious wife, the hot lady blacksmith, is have him accidentally kill her to speed run the explanation of why he doesn't like violence or weapons.
Yeah, I have a feeling that's exactly what they're doing, and
Which is beyond clumsy.
yeah, I think ultimately that is probably going to be the thing people both remember the most from the first episode and also like the least about the first episode.
Yep. Very clumsy, but not as clumsy as Perrin for killing his wife. Anyway.
Yeah, also, we don't get in the show anything about the Myrddraal until, like, just the random cutaway.
Yep. That thing that is relatively important because it poses a threat to Moraine and Lan, even, because I don't think thus far in the book you've gotten to see what they can do, but they're terrifying.
Yeah, and it was weird to me reading the book after watching the show that it was so prominent early, when in the show you get a couple looks at it and that's it.
Yeah.
When in the book this thing has been stalking all three of those guys. Like, all of them had seen it at various points.
Oh, sorry. Yes, all three of them. 3 show. 3. So yeah, our main characters. I love Rand so far.
Mm-hmm. No, I think they've done really well with him.
Yeah, Perrin and Mat. I'm hoping to see more of them be more themselves. Mat is supposed to have such a sense of fun and chaos and humor that he just hasn't had. Stealing from someone to pay for his gambling addiction, or at least just make money, and dealing with his terrible family. That's... He's supposed to be a source of levity, and so far he's been more depressing than the other two.
Yeah. Though I do like what they did with Padan Fain in the show, even though you never hear his name.
Yep.
I like him more as the kind of the sly, underhanded merchant who's a criminal on the side than the book. He literally just exists to throw exposition at the audience, which is not the best. I'm sure he has more of a role later. At least I would assume he does.
Mild spoiler alert for anyone in the audience who cares about Padan Fain. Alright, that was the pause. He's a Dark Friend. Like, he is a very minor, very low-down servant of the Dark One.
Which, honestly, the show does a good job of foreshadowing with how they depict him during the big fight scene.
Yes, I agree with you completely. I like him better in the show. I like how they showed that in the show a lot more. That was very fun.
That being said, his fellow traveler who is there just out of a seeming coincidence is completely absent from the show. What did they do to you, Tom?
My boy! My precious boy, Tom!
His big scene in the early chapters where he's showing off what he can do as a Gleeman was one of my favorite scenes. Because he just rattles off something like 30 stories that he knows.
Yeah.
And it does so much to build the feeling that this world has such a deep and rich history with a ton of lore and myths.
Which it does, and that's part of why he's in the story. That's not all of it. Oh
No,
boy.
obviously there is something going on with him. I don't know what yet, but he screams that there is something more important.
I do love my boy Tom Maryland for president and everybody. That's something I don't want to spoil for you, because I think you're going to enjoy it a lot. His influence is so strong on so many of the main characters. The only spoiler I will give you is that he is still around where I am in the books. So, he has at least 7.5 books of safety.
And I'm sure they will find a way to work him in later, but...
Yeah, someone's cast as him. He's in the credits. He's on IMDb. There is a Tom Maryland in the story.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
I just don't think that they're going to get his entrance nearly as good. Because I know where they have to go next in the story. And there's only one place I can really think of them introducing him, and I'm sad.
Mm-hmm.
Just a quick aside, if I'm remembering this correctly, he accompanies Moraine Lan and her semi-kidnapped children out of Emmons Field in the books, because he distrusts Aes Sedai and he doesn't want to let Moraine completely have her way with these children. Which sounds really bad when I put it that way. I'm so sorry.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I actually haven't quite gotten to the part in the book where they leave yet.
Cool. Yeah, it's a bit different.
I can imagine. So, one thing that really caught me off guard my second time through, religion in the book is super prominent in these people's lives.
Yes, absolutely. And that goes hand in hand with what I was saying earlier about the myth and the folklore and just the sense of history. The idea of, like, the mantra they have of the Dark One and the Forsaken are locked in... Is it Sheo Ghul? Yeah, are locked in Sheo Ghul till the end of time. The Creator put them there, blah, blah, blah. Where is it? That's really important. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, the whole thing that the townsfolk have with, what was it? Something about the light, like, the light will help us survive this, and if not, we'll survive it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
That does such a good job of characterizing the people in this town, and that's also, like, any mention of the light is pretty much stripped out of the episode, as I could recall.
Which makes me sad. And just I haven't seen episode 2 yet either. If episode 2 does not start with the townspeople confronting Moraine for drawing the Dark One, drawing the, blanking on names here, I'm so sorry. Drawing the Warhammer Beastmen upon them. And her giving an epic speech that once again contributes to the history of the world, then I'm going to be sad, because that speech she gives is so important later on.
I hope they do. I hope they do show that then.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So that was something... Hopping back a little bit, you referred to them as Moraine's adopted children.
Semi-kidnapped.
That's something that's come across very interestingly as a difference between the two. In the show, they feel much more like young adults. Whereas in the book, I would have pegged most of them at, 15, maybe 16.
Yeah, definitely. I don't specifically remember how old they're supposed to be at the start of the books. Even if they're a little older than that, they've lived a very sheltered life so far. They are like country folks who have this very, nigh puritanical upbringing with how Emond's Field does things. They don't, in the show, they really don't feel that way. And I don't think that's a big change, but it is a noticeable change. I think I'm excited to see how they're going to handle that one going forward.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see, because you can actually do a little bit of math based on the conversation that Nynaeve and Moiraine have in the cave, which I don't even know what to make of that scene. But
I can explain in a second.
if you do the math based on what they talk about in that scene, all of the characters are at least 20.
Yeah.
Because they establish that women get their braid when they turn 20.
Which feels very... Yeah. Yeah. So they're all, like, young adults, no longer teenagers that age. They feel like it, definitely.
They are very much written, and that kind of reflects a lot of the differences in character relationships between the book and the show.
Yeah, which, once again, spoiler warning, I'm so sorry, for Rand and Egwene, Egwene is not Rand's love interest. Like, they spend a while with a will they, won't they, playing it off, but there is a scene later on in the story where they meet for the first time in a while, and they have a conversation about how, like, that's just not how they feel about each other. Which is a great scene, and works so well because it's really amicable and easy, and it works so well because in the books, there never really was anything between them. They were clearly, like, attracted to each other, but it wasn't even a breakup at that point, whereas in the show, they're very clearly an item.
Yeah, that was something that surprised me the first time watching the show, was the characters are talking like they're teasing their friend about this unrequited crush, as, you know, teenagers do, and young adults, some of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have that entire scene at night in the inn.
Yep.
And I was just sitting there like, oh, I guess these two are together. And then I'm reading the book and I'm like, no, they're not.
Not supposed to be.
For what the show presents us, I feel like it's actually written pretty well.
Yeah.
The conversation that they have out in the mountains about her deciding to become a wisdom, which means they can't be together, was a really well-written emotional scene about two characters discussing their problems and determining that, yeah, this is gonna hurt, but obviously a life together isn't what at least one of us wants.
Yep.
Like, just these two characters having a very adult conversation. I was like, okay, this is actually reasonably well written.
Yeah, it's a change that I kind of like, because the childishness of Rand and Egwene's relationship in the book
is super
annoying. It is annoying a lot of the time. And I understand why it's there and how it is the way it is, and in hindsight I don't mind it as much. I have plenty of other things to dislike those two when they're together for now. I wish... I'm not gonna spoil that much stuff about that, but where I am in the books, I wish... I can't wait for you to see it, honestly.
Yeah.
Oh boy, have things gone weirdly for Egwene.
That's an interesting way to put it. I'm a little scared now.
Yeah, you should be.
Well, you know what this means, though.
Oh.
I think we have covered everything up to easily, hands down, the best scene in the entire first episode. And one change that really highlights the shift in perspective being a good idea, and that's the battle scene.
Yes! Rather than just being told that Moiraine called lightning down upon the... Wow, I'm stupid. What are they?
The Trollocs?
Trollocs!
Yes.
Trollocs! Yay, the Beastmen! Rather than just hearing about it after the fact, we get to see it happen. Which
Yeah.
was very cool.
Which was a phenomenal change, because that battle scene is fantastic.
It was.
Just perfectly paced from start to finish. The special effects, minus one shot I can think of a Trolloc coming through Rand and Tam's front door. I'm reasonably certain that a lot of the effects during that fight, as far as the Trollocs are concerned, are practical and look very good. And especially after hearing that the show had a tiny budget compared to similar big-name fantasy shows in the past decade. Practical effects at least always seem to be cheaper, so I wouldn't be at all surprised if they actually did just put a whole bunch of big guys in suits and told them to act like animal people.
That would make me extremely happy, and it makes me want to go apply to be one of them for the next season.
But yeah, just actually getting to see Moraine and Lamb do their thing, whereas the book is just like, yeah, you should have been here, it was great. It was so cool.
Yeah, the only trade-off is that we lose some very important interaction between Tam and Rand.
I'm assuming you're talking about the fever ramblings that shed some doubts on Rand's parentage.
Yes. So first, and this again, get into some nitpick territory for just a second. Tam is a pushover in the show. In the book, he kills 3 Trollocs without really taking much of a scratch, and then one of them does get him with its poisoned blade. But something that we haven't really super gotten into in the show, as far as I can remember, is the Heron Mark sword.
Yeah, that is...
It's the sign of a blade master. It is the sign of someone who is unbelievably good, if it's properly earned rather than just gotten, is the sign of someone who is unbelievably good with a sword.
And based on how Tam fought in that battle in the book, I would assume he probably earned his properly.
Yes, he did.
I don't even need a spoiler warning for that. If you read the book, it's blatantly obvious that he's very much the, like, old soldier type who retires to a backwater village where nobody knows his name.
Yes. So that's a little bit of a nitpick. They made Tam look like a pushover, which is very sad. Because in the books, pardon the expression, but Tam is kind of a badass. We're going to get into spoiler territory for both the audience and you, Graham. So do you mind if I spoil something from later on in the books?
No.
Particularly pertaining to Rand and Tam.
No, I don't mind.
The fevered ramblings, Rand is not Tam's son.
I figured as much.
Yes. They haven't really gotten to it in the book. There is a prophecy that the Dragon Reborn will be born upon the slopes of Dragonmount to a very particular kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
Who you've heard mentioned in the books. They talk about an Aelman.
Yes.
Aiel-man.
Yeah.
They're the Viking Mongols. They're the Fremen from Dune.
Okay,
sort of.
That makes sense.
Yeah, they're the Viking Mongol Fremen. They are the nomadic desert people with a highly militaristic society who keep to themselves and have constantly had conflicts with the people around them, going back many, many years. I just remembered something in the books that's really cool. But anyway, again, sorry, spoilers. I feel bad spoiling it, but Rand is one of them. Hence the comment in the book from Tom Maryland of like, you're so tall, you're the height of an ailment, you're the very picture of an ailment. It's because he is.
Of course, that makes sense.
Yes, which is going to be extremely important later. But yeah, so Tam's fevered ramblings are big hints about what his past was, the battles he fought in, who he knew. And it's going to be very important later, and the fact that we don't have that already is a kind of a problem.
Yeah, because in the book, it's already set some seeds of doubt in Rand's mind.
Yeah, and
that are going to be completely missing going forward in the show.
Yeah, and it's a big part of his motivation. It's something that, if I remember correctly, Moraine uses to manipulate Rand a time or two before he learns the truth, is pushing him to find out, like feeding on that doubt that he has in him. I swear Moraine is a good guy, sort of. Not having that is important, and when he finds out the truth, it is a huge character moment because it drives the feeling of isolation that he's already struggling with at the time. And I don't know how they're going to get around that.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see.
Yes.
And then, of course, we come to probably the second most bizarre change, aside from giving Perrin a wife, is Nynaeve being kidnapped.
Yeah, I have a theory about it, and I haven't seen the second episode yet, so I'm sure it'll be confirmed soon enough. But that was weird. That was bizarre.
Yeah.
In the books, if the Trollocs kidnap someone, you have a very limited amount of time to go rescue them before they're just straight up eaten.
Which you kind of see in the show, because they're stopping mid-battle to just shout out on townsfolk.
Ha! It was great. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. I want to see how that's resolved. Do you mind more spoilers of why I think they did it?
No, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it.
I would not be surprised if Lan ends up rescuing Nineveh, her.
I think they pronounce it Nynaeve in the show, but then I'm just thinking of Neil Stephenson and
Nynaeve nails. Yeah,
Thank you.
I that's the direction I feel. That's what I think is probably going to happen in the next episode or so, is that they rescue her. Specifically, Lan has to do it because there's a real competitive relationship between her and Lan. It eventually becomes more of just a relationship between the two of them. It is honestly a relationship I, for the most part, really love in the books, so I'm happy about it. I won't get into it, but out of all the romantic relationships in the books, it's one of the healthiest. As opposed to, I'm just going to be as vague as possible, as opposed to Perrin, abuse is a healthy part of every relationship, isn't it, Abara? And Rand, polygamy is a thing I can invent, right, Al4?
Man, I am excited to read the rest of this book.
Oh boy!
And that really takes us to the closing shot, because if I remember correctly, other than Nynaeve being gone, they more or less do the same thing in the show that they do in the book, with Moraine healing Tam's poison.
Yep.
It's definitely faster in the show, but they're on an hour time limit, so it's understandable. Because it's like 10 or 11 chapters of the book in one episode.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing. Having the visible army of Trollocs in the distance...
That was what I was going to ask about, because in the book, they heavily imply that the Trollocs could come back if they stay there, and in the show, the Trollocs are coming back already.
Yes. It's probably not a big change, but it's a change I don't like.
Yeah, because it kind of heavily implies that everybody in the village is gonna die, within 30 minutes.
Yeah, the only reason I don't like it is the fact that it takes some of Moraine's characterization away. Because having this very visible threat for her to be like, look, they're like a mile away on that hill, they're gonna kill all your friends and family if you don't come with me, is not as in character for her as they're around here somewhere, they're probably coming back, you need to go with me to be safe. You owe me, so you're going with me to be safe. Which is that level of subtle, much more subtle manipulation is far more in character for that totally a good guy Aes Sedai.
Yeah, she's in the book she's very she seems like a good guy, but she's definitely not afraid to play dirty to get what she needs.
Yeah, that's her. I love her and I hate her. She does some things. She is a not small part of why Rand desperately needs therapy. The things she does to that poor boy.
Oh, look at it this way. Is it a good fantasy story if at least half your characters don't need therapy by the midway point?
Of course not. Graham, it's the fantasy age. Therapy hasn't been invented yet.
That's fair.
Unless your name is Kaladin Stormblessed, and that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that last shot was included just to have a striking cliffhanger to end the first episode on.
Yeah.
It accomplishes that fine. Honestly, the battle scene would have kept me watching even if nothing else, because again, that was just so good.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Overall, I'm very optimistic moving forward. I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to looking at the second one and giving it the same old far too close an inspection.
Of course. But that's gonna have to wait for another video. We've gone long enough already. But thank you for joining me.
You're so welcome.
Your insight was very handy, as I am trying to keep pace between the book and the show, and that's probably going to be very difficult for the next several episodes.
Yeah, I believe in you. I'm going to skim through those chapters too to try and keep pace with it after I watch the episode, and I'll make more notes to talk next time.
That sounds good. And thank all of you out there for joining us. I hope you had as much fun with this as we did.
Yeah,
and
it's great.
Yeah, we'll probably just take this entire series one episode at a time.
I'm so excited.
So, see you in the next one.
Bye.
Bye.